Welcome home. Welcome aboard. Welcome into the trenches. I mean, today we're going to wrap up World War II, aren't we? I mean, last week, we brought it up to it was a good spot to close. We brought it up to 1943. And in 1943, we made the observation that the tide of war had begun to turn. The war had not been won yet, but by 1943, the tide of the war had begun to turn. And we identified three engagements, didn't we? Midway, Stalingrad, and El Alamein in North Africa. And in 1943 also, and I believe we closed with this, that in 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt met together at Casablanca, and Roosevelt, in a very spontaneous way, he simply, blurted out the concept of unconditional surrender. There will be no terms offered to the Japanese, the Italians, or the Germans. Now that was not completely upheld, but nonetheless, unconditional surrender was for the ears of Joseph Stalin, who was a bit dismayed, more than dismayed, suspicious by the fact that his allies, Churchill and Roosevelt, were rather slow, were dragging their feet on opening up a second front against Germany on the west and forced Hitler to divide his forces between the east, Russia, and the west, an Allied invasion, which will come in June of 1944. But let me stop here, and I need to catch my breath again in the year 1943, because in November of 1943, we have a very, very important conference at Tehran where Stalin will be invited and will attend. He believes that the situation in Russia is somewhat under control, and with the German surrender von Paulus at Stalingrad, it looked as if the situation was beginning to come under control in the Soviet Union. And Stalin felt comfortable enough to leave the Soviet Union. He never flew. He was always fearful of an explosion, but he traveled by armored train to Tehran in November in 1943. And there were two questions on the table. At least for us this afternoon, two questions on the table. One is that when will there be a second front opened up in the West against the Germans to force Hitler to divide his forces? And again, as we said last week, the Russians were getting pounded, weren't they, by the Wehrmacht. World War II in Europe, again, was won by the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. And we played an important role, but it was a complementary role. It was on the Eastern Front is where World War II was fought and won by the Soviet soldiers. The Red Army, 12 million strong, 300 divisions. And Stalin wants some help. I'm getting pounded. And he wants an answer to one question at Tehran. There were two. Here's the first one. When will you, my allies, and I'm sure he was kind of rolling his eyes at that, my allies, when will you open up a second front on the French coastline to relieve the pressure on me to compel Hitler to divide his forces? And he didn't get the answer that he wanted. He wanted a date. He wanted a place. He wanted a specific. And instead, Roosevelt and Churchill more than Roosevelt, talked about the fact that we do not have enough troops yet, but we do not have enough landing craft. What Churchill feared was a repeat of the trench warfare of World War I. When we hit the beaches, we need to get off the beaches quickly, and that we need to come hard, fast, and have overwhelming land, air, and sea power. For Churchill, the empire, the British people cannot endure a war of the trenches. We cannot endure that again. And Churchill also, and he was always on top of this, was suspicious of Stalin, very suspicious of Stalin's motives, both during the war and what his motives might be after the war in Eastern Europe. And we're not going to have time to dig into that. If we can do the Cold War, maybe sometime in 2020, that we can spend some time dealing parts of the Cold War, episodes of the Cold War. So Churchill is telling Roosevelt, delay, delay, delay. You see, what Churchill hoped, and he said this very carefully and not too loudly, he hoped that if we delay long enough, see, Churchill was a player, he knew the game. And the game was he hoped that if we delay long enough, Stalin will, like two scorpions in a bottle, Stalin will destroy Hitler. The other scorpion in the bottle, Hitler, will destroy Stalin and communism, Bolshevism, and we'll walk into Central Europe with a little bloodshed and with some financial investment and win the whole thing. And that's what Stalin was suspicious of. Delay, delay, delay was playing the game. If they wait long enough, I'll be down, Hitler will be down, and the West wins the whole thing. And as Stalin admitted to his foreign minister Molotov, again privately, if I were Churchill, if I were Roosevelt, that's the very thing I would do. I would delay, 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 and I'm down, Hitler's down, and you guys win it all. Delay, delay, delay. So when Stalin was told that the Second Front, D-Day, that we expect to have enough material and enough landing craft sometime in the spring of 1944. And can't you see Stalin looking across the table with those cold, yellow, reptilian eyes? Can't you see him? Just what I expected. In the spring of 1944, I've been waiting all of 41, 42, here it is the fall, 43. There may not be a Soviet Union in the spring of 1944. And I'm sure Churchill was thinking, I hope not. I hope not. You know, Churchill always in chirping in Roosevelt's ear, don't trust Stalin. He'll say anything, he'll agree to anything, he'll sign anything. He's a sociopath. And these are Churchill's words right here. What we need to do, Franklin, is we need to shake hands with the Russians as far east as possible. Keep them out of Poland, keep them out of the Baltic, keep them out of German Central Europe. Shake hands with them as far east as possible. They are not to be trusted. And Roosevelt, this is just the problem, Winston, that you Brits have had with the Russians. You don't trust them. And we're going to need to work with Stalin after the war. We are going to need to treat the Russians as men and brothers. This is why we have a problem. You have a problem. You have a problem with Stalin. You don't trust him. We need to trust him so we can work together after the war. And Churchill, can you imagine Churchill? You don't know these people. You don't know them. And Roosevelt, I do know them. And I know you even better. And you're chirping in my ear about don't trust Stalin. The spring of 44. I wonder what type of allies you really are. The spring of 44. And the second question, that who will be the Supreme Allied Commander? Who will have the command, the military command of a lifetime? Roosevelt had promised that to General Marshall, that this will be the capstone of a brilliant career, that you will plan and execute what became Operation Overlord, D-Day. And Roosevelt had to inform General Marshall, I cannot keep that promise. I need you here in Washington. I can't have you running around in the Black Forest, chasing the Nazis around. I need you here in Washington, a phone call away, a 5-minute car drive away to explain the war to me. I have to break a promise. I made a bad promise. And sometimes we have to use that phrase, don't we? You say to someone, I made a bad promise, I can't keep that promise. It's a nice little way to wiggle out of a situation. I made a bad promise, I can't keep that promise. You can learn things from me. I know how to move around.
Can I ask you a question?
Not yet.
Okay.
Go ahead, what?
Well, because I know you did your thesis on Roosevelt and you're describing Roosevelt's behavior and it's sounding to me like he's naive, was he?
You what?
He's
A little naive, maybe hopeful, maybe both words work. He was too optimistic, too optimistic. Churchill knew that, but Americans by nature are optimistic. Churchill was an old world character, wasn't he? He knew the score. He knew Gallipoli. He'd made a huge mistake at Gallipoli.
Oh, yeah.
A huge mistake. And Churchill, he always wanted someone else to do his fighting. And for Churchill, for him, the primary goal was to preserve the empire. Remember, India is restless here in the 40s. Egypt, to preserve the empire. So Roosevelt tells Marshall, I'll give you the consolation prize, that you can pick the Supreme Allied Commander. You choose. And he will promote over 300 senior officers that he will give Eisenhower the command of a lifetime. And I need you here in Washington, General Marshall. And we know, don't we? That when Eisenhower was president, and that's part of maybe another discussion, if you do the Eisenhower years during the Cold War. And I know that many people in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, wait, am I that old? Had, dismissed Eisenhower as being just a bubblehead as president. More concerned with his short game, his golf game, than he was with running the country. That's not true. I mean, today, presidential historians have really raised the Eisenhower years to rank Eisenhower 7th or 8th as president. We'll do that maybe some other day. Marshall knew this about Eisenhower because Eisenhower had served under him. Marshall knew 3 things about Eisenhower, and I want Eisenhower to be the Supreme Allied Commander. What do I know about him? I know 1, that he's well-liked, and he will be leading a war effort that is around the table. There are so many egos, and that Eisenhower will be able to treat these egos. Not that Eisenhower did not have an ego, he did. I mean, you cannot wind up being a 5-star general without thinking you're pretty good at what you do. But nonetheless, Eisenhower could park his ego at the door because he knew that the table would be filled with egos. Marshall knew that Eisenhower could be an excellent CEO. He was not a brilliant militarist. He was not a brilliant strategist. He was an excellent CEO to keep all these egos working together. And the eyes on the prize, the defeat of Nazism. And let's temper our egos. The goal is the defeat of Germany. How do we get there? Marshall knew that Eisenhower was a planner. He also knew that people liked him. Secondly, he also knew this about Eisenhower, that Eisenhower was a detail guy. And I know what we learned about in the 50s and the 60s, or what we thought we knew about him, that he was a detail guy. And the very best way for us to get a handle on Eisenhower as being a detail guy, the next time you're in Abilene, Kansas, and there's no reason why you should ever be in Abilene, Kansas, unless you want a failed honeymoon, all right? There's no reason you should ever be in Abilene, Kansas. But, and you can bring this up online, the planning book for D-Day, Operation Overlord, I'm doing this deliberately. It was 3 inches thick, 1,000 pages, single space. And every page reported to Eisenhower. Decisions were made by Eisenhower. The planning was by Eisenhower. And the devil's in the details. And the only piece of that planning book that did not report to Eisenhower was the weather, Mother Nature. And she reports to no one. She has a mind of her own. She reports to no one. And that will be a major factor in Eisenhower's decision to go or not to go in May or June in 1944. The third thing about Eisenhower is that Eisenhower had planned successfully and had carried out with some success, most successfully, 3 major amphibious assaults. North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. So here's a guy who was able to keep his ego at the door and get people to stay focused. Here's a man who was a superb organizer. And here's a man who was experienced in planning amphibious operations. All of those went into Marshall's decision, Eisenhower, Eisenhower. And in December of 1943, in the aftermath of the Tehran Conference, Eisenhower went to England to put together the largest amphibious operation in the history of the world. Talk about pressure. Talk about pressure. And can I do this? Can I pull this off? And you remember the British complaint about these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans showing up in Great Britain. Remember that? The Americans, they're over here. Who can finish this for me? They're over here.
Overpaid.
They're overpaid and they're oversexed. They're over here, they're overpaid and they're oversexed. And for many Brits, let's get these Americans out of here and let the French women deal with them. So, I mean, everybody knew the invasion was coming. I mean, Adolf Hitler from Berlin, from the war room in Berlin, had issued a directive. You can read it online. A directive, Führer Directive number 51, sent to all of his senior commanders that an invasion is coming. The Allies are coming. The only question is, where are they going to land and when? No question that they're coming. And it will be, if they have successful lodgment, which means a landing and a buildup, it's a quick dash across northern France to the Rhine and into the Ruhr Valley. The Russians, the Soviets, the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, Judeo-Bolshevism, they're still 800 kilometers to the east. There's time. There is no time. Consequences of staggering proportions may follow if the Allies have a successful landing. So in Berlin, and picture this with me, go with me to Berlin, to the war room, and Hitler's standing around the table with his generals, and looking at the map of France and the coastline of France. Where will they land? Where will they land? We cannot defend everything, gentlemen. Frederick the Great, he that tries to defend everything defends nothing. We need to take risks. We need to gamble. We need to be intuitive. Hitler always trusted his gut, his intuition. Schoolbook learning is for schoolbook learning. You need to go with your gut sometimes. And Hitler put his finger right on the Normandy beaches. They're going to land right here. That's my gut. They're going to land right here. It's bold, it's unpredictable, it appears to be on paper unsuccessful. They're going to land right here. And he put his index finger right there. I was there, right there. And I heard that map crinkle, right there. Now, the generals around the table knew they had to be cautious. You know, one cannot contradict Hitler without consequences, right? So they needed to be careful. And I can see them just kind of looking at each other and rolling their eyes and saying, who's going to go first with this one? It cannot be the Normandy. It cannot be those beaches. There's no port there. The Allies are going to have to bring ashore all types of materiel, tanks, trucks, any aircraft, weapons. There's no port. There's just Crane's Beach, if you will. There's no port there. And they never imagined that Eisenhower would bring his own port with him temporarily. I'll mention that briefly in a moment. And as they argued the point around the table, gotta be careful, gotta be careful. Mein Führer, it has to be Calais. It has to be Calais. Calais is the shortest distance between the British and the French coastline. It has to be Calais. It's the old geometry problem. You know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. It has to be Calais. And then they reviewed for Hitler history that they knew Hitler knew. I mean, Hitler was he had his own sense of history. Mein Führer, when Caesar invaded England, he invaded from Calais. When William the Conqueror invaded England, he invaded from Calais. When Napoleon was planning the invasion of England, it was going to be from Calais. And you, Monführer, when you were planning Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Great Britain, it was to be from Calais. It must be Calais. It has to be. That's the closest point. And Hitler considered this, and he backed off. Calais. On a clear day, I can almost see the cliffs of Dover. It must be Calais. It can't be Normandy. Eisenhower brought his port with him. They were called mulberries. You may not have heard of that phrase. And all they were large chunks of concrete reinforced with steel. And think of putting together a toy train set. You know, where you join them? And these mulberries were joined 1 by 2 by 3 by 4 out in the ocean, and to act as temporary ports until we capture Calais. And it was to be temporary. And Eisenhower knew that. We need to get Cherbourg, Le Havre. An American GI in World War II, certainly in Europe, required, and I'm talking in a broad sense, about a ton of supplies per month. So these mulberries are to be temporary. And in order to deceive the Germans, see, Hitler asked, what are we hearing from our agents in Great Britain? And what am I hearing from Garbo? Garbo is always right. Garbo was the code name. He's always right. He gets it right. What do you hear from Garbo? What do you hear from Garbo? Garbo was telling us it's going to be that the Americans are landing at Calais. You're hearing that from Garbo? He's my finest agent. What are the other agents saying? It's Calais, it's Calais, it's Calais. Now the reason for that is that British intelligence, MI5, MI6, have been able, at least as far as they knew, to have been able to apprehend every German agent, and including Garbo. And they were giving a choice. Either misinform Berlin, disinformation, or get shot. Now that's not much of a choice. So it is, I'm hearing from our agents, Calais, 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 and opposite Calais, and you maybe have seen the PBS series, The Ghost Army. It looked as if Eisenhower was preparing to land from Calais, 1 division, 2 divisions, 10 divisions, 20 divisions, 30 divisions. They were all blow-up dolls. They were inflatables, blow-up canvas. So they blew up. It's like a private, the sergeant telling me, Private Hylander, today, blow up. I need you to blow up to inflate a 20-ton Jeep. Pull it out of the package. I did it yesterday. I'm still breathing heavy. Another one.
Toys R Us.
Everything was an inflatable. Tanks, any aircraft, planes, barracks, and it looked like a 20, 30, 40 divisions were being formed at Calais. And out there also, to make it stick, was a lookalike, a Patton lookalike. And if it walked like Patton, quacked like Patton, and talked like Patton, it had to be Patton. And the Germans knew that Eisenhower is not coming without Patton. He's my warhorse. He's not coming without Patton. He's the only guy, only senior general that I've allowed to be part of this invasion who's over the age of 50. I want young men on those beaches, who don't tire, who don't get wet, who don't need to eat, with the exception of Patton. He's 52. He is my warhorse. There's no way he's going without Patton, without George. And I'll finish with this piece to the mastermind to protect the fact that it's going to be Calais, it's going to be Normandy. As an American, we'll call them SEALs. SEALs put ashore on the beaches of Calais, and they're taking samples of barbed wire. Why? Because I want to know what kind of cutters to bring with them. And they're taking sand samples, and they're leaving big holes here, and leaving tools here. Why sand samples? They want to know the consistency of the sand. Will it support a 20, 30, or a 40-ton tank? And they're kidnapping soldiers that are patrolling the beach, and they're bringing them back to be debriefed. It has to be Calais. There's the army. They're leaving evidence. It's Calais. It has to be Calais. Churchill called it a bodyguard of lies. And a bodyguard of lies, to protect that it's going to be the Normandy beaches. Hold on for a minute. Just for a moment. General von Rundstedt, at 69, was the oldest active field marshal in the German army. He's in charge of the Western Front. He's in charge of France. Rommel had been redeployed from North Africa, and he was second in command. And Rommel was building the Atlantic Wall. You see, for Hitler, Rommel, and others, that the war has a political edge as well as a military edge. Ask Lyndon Johnson about that. I got you. That, and they're thinking, we have to think politically here. And Hitler was on with this as well. If we can stop the invasion at the water's edge and push it back into the ocean, if we can do that, prevent enlargement, the Americans may lose interest, and they may shift their interest to the Pacific. If we stop it at the water's edge, Roosevelt may not get reelected. We have an election coming up in 44. A word about that later. So we need to stop it there, and we need, and Rommel, absolutely. And we need to put the tanks down on the beaches. The invasion part is the most vulnerable part. Once the Allies get ashore, and with their supplies, with their resources, that quick dash across northern France, they're at the Rhine River, they're into the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heartland, and it's over. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask you the name of the PBS series again, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's called, I think it's called The Ghost Army.
Ghost Army.
It's great. It's about 90 minutes. It's terrific. You're gonna see me blowing up a tank. This way.
A lot of hot air.
Eisenhower wants to go. He wants to go in May. In fact, he wants to go on the 5th of May. But there aren't enough landing craft. There are not enough Higgins boats because the war in the Pacific is drawing off all of these landing craft with the island hopping, you see. Guam, Saipan, Tarawa, and so forth. And I need to wait. And I need looking through his calendar as to the weather reports. I need the right amount of high tide to get these landing craft ashore, and the right amount of moonlight, so when the paratroopers go in the morning of the invasion, that they'll be able to see where they're landing, and the pilots will be able to drop them behind enemy lines where they can blow up bridges and railroads, assassinate officers. I need to put all of this package together, and it's all on me. No wonder Eisenhower smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. He drank 15 cups of coffee. That'll do you in. That's all you need. Coffee and cigarettes. And Kay Summersby. Who was his Jeep driver. They were an item, you know that. They were a real item. In fact, they were in every photograph. And Kay would be leaning into Ike, smiling, good-looking woman. And Ike would be leaning into Kay, smiling. They looked like they were on their honeymoon. You're in a war zone. And Marshall got to Eisenhower, and he said, "Get her out of the photographs." The buzz back here, get her out of the photographs. Mamie thinks she's in trouble, and she was.
Yes.
And she was. And Marshall, you cannot divorce Mamie, when you're in a war zone. The Supreme Allied Commander cannot divorce Mamie for the driver of his Jeep. It's not going to play well in the United States. And he wanted to. If you believe Truman, there's no reason not to believe Truman, a true man, that I want to divorce Mamie in the middle of a war. When do you get home? Marshall, when do you get home? And then do the paperwork. Not now. You've got a war to win. Ike wants to go on the 5th, not enough landing craft. I want to go the first week of June. I get the right tide, I get the right moonlight. He wants to go on June 5th. And on June 5th, while in his trailer park, a northeaster boils down the English Channel. And that trailer park is shaking in the wind. The rain is thrumming on the roof. And the waves in the English Channel are 5 or 6 feet high, with whitecaps being whipped off them. And Ike gets up on the 5th and calls in the staff. Fellas, look at the weather. We can't go today. Yeah, but the men are already in the landing craft. They're ready to go. They've climbed down the ropes. They're in the landing craft. They're ready to go. We can't go today. I need a weather report. And he called for his meteorologist, a real meteorologist. Not the ones you see on TV today, right? that are showcasing for an Emmy or an Oscar, right? This cold front, it is going to be so dreadful. Be careful, it's going to rain. How do I look? Even guys do that, right? I cringe when I see the men do the weather report and it says, hair done by, wardrobe. My brothers would absolutely throw me in the river. I'm the older brother. Oh, wardrobe by? Hair done by? He called in a real meteorologist, a Scotsman, James Staggs. What's going on here, James? Never seen this before. When's it going to stop raining? I don't know. We've got 2 more storms that are being organized and going to come down the channel. This weather occurs in January, not in June. However, you will get a bit of a break on the 6th. There'll be some diminishing of the rain. The wind will abate somewhat. I cannot do anything about the rough weather on the channel. And Eisenhower, if I don't go on the 6th, flipping through that weather almanac, I cannot go until the end of June. And that gives the Germans 3 more weeks to figure things out. And maybe find out it's not going to be find out it is going to be at Normandy. Now, the same foul weather is on the other side of the English Channel. Von Rundstedt, overall commander, they're not coming today. Look at this weather. This weather won't clear out for 3 or 4 weeks. They're not coming today. They're not coming this week at all. So he hightails it down to Paris. And it's been a while. And he hightails it down to Paris. Thank you. Rommel, it's his wife's 50th birthday. You don't want to miss your wife's 50th birthday. I mean, or your anniversary, you get in trouble. If you miss a birthday and an anniversary, that's trouble, all right? So those are 2 dates you want to remember. So I'm going to surprise my wife and go home to Ulm, Germany. I've done some shopping, and I'm going to surprise her. The Allies aren't coming. So he's back in Ulm, happy birthday to you, Marlene. You're surprised that the General is here, aren't you? Happy birthday to you. And then the phone rings. General Rommel's for you. Oh, scheist! I was there. My mind can be anywhere. Honey, it's D-Day. Your B-Day has to wait. Save me some cake. I'll be back to the front. Von Rundstedt is back in Paris. And ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. Can you imagine this? Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Renee picks up the phone. General, it is for you. Oh, scheiße. I'll pay you later. I gotta get my clothes back on. I gotta get to the front. Nobody expected the attack. And Eisenhower gambled everything. He truly did. This was a huge gamble. And Hitler had taken control of the tanks. It's going to be Calais. Only I will deploy the tanks. Rommel gets back to Normandy, and he's on the phone, to Keitel, Wilhelm Keitel, chief of staff. Get Hitler on the phone. He's sleeping. Get him on the phone. Here they come. I need these tanks down on the beaches now. That's the weakest, most vulnerable part of the invasion. We can't get Hitler up. He's cranky. And we don't want a cranky Fuhrer. There are consequences. Now, Hitler was on a deadly mix of amphetamines so he could do 3 days worth of work in one. He was taking sedatives so he could sleep a little bit, taking cocaine eye drops to improve his vision so he could read more quickly and with more clarity. He had been gassed twice during World War I. Precious time was lost. And the lodgment was made. Omar Bradley, was directing the landing in. Our beaches were Omaha and Utah. The British and the Canadians had theirs, Gold, Juno, and got the other one. Sword. Gold, Juno, and Sword. And the lodgment is made. Saving Private Ryan, the first 5 minutes are probably the closest we'll ever get to D-Day and the commotion in that first wave. And that great line from Tom Hanks, that great line, as the men are coming in, for that, taking his boat, the bow to go down. See you on the beach. Remember that line? It's a great line. See you on the beach. It's Omaha. See you, Omaha and Utah were 2 American beaches. See you on the beach. Right before the daylight invasion, Eisenhower had gone down to the airborne. And like some Shakespearean general on the eve of combat, walking among the men, they knew they had to see him. They knew they had to see him. And these are young men, they're invincible, 18, 19, 20, and they've got their kits on, they're ready to go, they're eye black, and they've got their ammo, and they've got their weapons, they've got their canteen, they're ready to go. And Eisenhower walking among them. See, he knew a number they didn't know. He'd been told by his intelligence, these men, you're gonna lose about 85% of these guys. They're going in at night behind enemy lines. It worked out to 15%. He didn't know that. They didn't know that. They need to see me, man to boy, father to son. I'm ordering to death the very thing I love, the Army. It's my men, my soldiers. I can imagine a conversation, can't you? Where you from, son? Texas. Got a girl? You bet. Do you write her? All the time. You gonna marry her? As soon as I get home. You're getting home. This is the end of the beginning, or the beginning of the end. You're getting home. He knew 85%. So they didn't know that. And as those men began to load onto their C-47 planes, they called them, they went on the C-47 planes and hooking up to get ready to jump, Eisenhower asked Kay, drive me down to the end of the tarmac, as I want to get out of the Jeep. As she remembered to get out of the Jeep, and he stood, and as those planes lifted off into that night sky, still full of clouds from the departing storm, Eisenhower. And as Kay remembered, when he got into the car, his eyes were filled, they were brimming. The tears were leaking down his cheeks. I'm sending to death the very thing I love. As Robert E. Lee always said, the most difficult thing is to send to death the men you love. But they trust me. They trust me. Man to boy, father to son. And when the word came, the lodgment had been made, and now it's the push across France, isn't it? And as the lodgment is made in June, there's an attempt in July of 1920, 1944 to blow up Hitler. It failed. See, those who attempted the assassination of Hitler were hoping that if we can kill Hitler, and they hoped to get Himmler and Goering in the same room at the same time, eliminate the head of the Nazi Party, and see if we can cut a deal with Churchill and Roosevelt, stop the fighting in the West, and deal with the oncoming Russians. The Red Army is clawing its way through Poland. That never happened. Roosevelt and Churchill dismissed the attempt on Hitler's life as thugs. One group of Nazis trying to kill another group of Nazis. There's no resistance here. There's resistance in Poland. There's a resistance in the Baltic. There's a resistance in France. But these are one group of thugs trying to murder another group of thugs. So we're on to the Rhine. We're on to the Ruhr. It's December of 1944. In November, Roosevelt is reelected by a wide margin. And I'm a Roosevelt guy, as you know. I did my work on FDR. And I'll be brief here. He had no business running for re-election. Absolutely no business. He was dying and he knew it. He knew it. And he should not have stood for a fourth term, but he did. And he did if you read his you know, when you do work on somebody, you get all this stuff, you know, and you look at the little crib notes and you learn to read his hand, and he was shaking. I mean, his blood pressure was 240 over 130. How about that? That's on medication. On medication, 240 over 130. He was taking codeine for a cough. He had lost 30 pounds. His clothes fit like he was a skeleton. He could not taste his food. He ought not to have run, but he did. And he look at the little scribbles. And what he's doing, Roosevelt, in those little scribbles, he's trying to bargain with the Lord. The Lord does not bargain. The Lord does not deal. It's not like going and buying a new car and you can negotiate the sticker price. All right? The Lord doesn't deal. You got an expiration date. Take a look at it. It's on the bottom of the can, all right? Or on the label. And in those notes, Roosevelt is asking the Lord, give me enough breath, give me enough heartbeats, give me enough strength to see victory, that I know I've won my war, that I've known my boys and my ladies have won their war, and then take me. Just let me know we've won the war and then take me. Didn't happen, did it? Roosevelt died in April of 45. In Europe, the war's over in May. In Asia, it's in August. So he wins re-election by a large margin. And running with him is Harry Truman, for reasons we don't have time to get into, but they're very specific reasons why Roosevelt, who did not know Truman well at all, I want to run with this guy. And he can bring an awful lot to the ticket. So Truman's going to make a big decision shortly. You know, when Truman, you know, Truman did not even know that Roosevelt was out of town in April of 45 when he went down to Warm Springs to be with you know who, right? You know, the woman he wanted to marry 20 years ago. And mother said no. Eleanor offered divorce, but Ma said no. I'll never see her again. He saw her all the time, didn't he? All the time. And she was with Roosevelt, and the last one to hear the voice, and the last one to be with him. And he had that tremendous stroke, didn't he? And as she remembered, Lucy remembered, the last words that I heard him say is that he took his fingers and put them to his temple and said, "Oh, it hurts." And then he was, before his chin hit his chest, he was dead. She knew one thing big time: I gotta clear out of here. I'm not supposed to be here. She was with him all the time. That's another whole story. Let's jump to the Pacific for a little bit. In the Pacific, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle in the history of the world. The Japanese lost the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Whatever remaining carriers and heavy battleships they had lost at Leyte Gulf. The Philippines, MacArthur was on the ground, Nimitz, Halsey, and King were on the ocean, weren't they? And at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, this is the first time that the kamikaze pilots arrived. And you do not need to be an experienced pilot. All you need to do is know how to take off, pull it this way, and dive on a big ship and push it that way. And the Japanese were exhausted by 44, surrounded, and nothing was getting in and nothing getting out. The American submarine force sank about 55% of all Japanese shipping and military targets. And they only comprised, the American submarine force only comprised about 2% of the firepower in the Pacific. But they got 55% of all Japanese shipping and military ships. And it was unrestricted submarine warfare. The war in the Pacific was far more racist, bloody, than the war in Europe. The war in the Pacific, take no prisoners. And like the Germans had done in 1917, the word from the Navy, unrestricted submarine warfare. Shoot any ship, whether it's merchant, military, or a passenger ship, and sink it. And then And then those people in lifeboats or those people in life jackets, machine gun them, kill them in the water. Take no prisoners. On the land, take no prisoners. You know, my father, who was an officer in World War II, if the Japanese ever surrendered, they come out of a cave with their hands up. Don't even let them near you. Take all your clothes off to make sure you don't have a concealed grenade or something here, or concealed in your buttocks. Don't let them near you unless they're completely undressed. They're not to be trusted, and take no prisoners. And that's another conversation that I had with him once. He never went back to it again. And I know why he never went back to it. He got to it a little bit on that fourth beer. And then he never went back to it. Take no prisoners. They don't take prisoners, we don't take prisoners. Leyte Gulf, on the way. On the MacArthur, the land war in the Philippines, I shall. Much more muscular, isn't it? Than saying I will. Will is too thin. I shall return. And he did. And Franklin Roosevelt was willing, because MacArthur had so much juice, you know, back in Washington, D.C., and through his dad as well, that unlike in Europe, where there was only one Supreme Allied commander, you know, that Roosevelt had permitted two commanders, in MacArthur, the land war, and Halsey King and Nimitz in the naval war, as they made their island hopping this way toward the Japanese home islands, and MacArthur coming up through the Philippines, and American, basically Marine units and naval units, you know, into Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Okinawa was seen by the Japanese as an extension of the Japanese home islands. And there were no Japanese soldiers surrendered at Okinawa. In fact, the civilians were leaping with their children down to the rocks, weren't they? That if the Americans take you, they will execute you. And hold that 1/4, I'll give you this number right now, 1/4, 25% of all American casualties in the Pacific were at Okinawa. And now that Truman is president, said, I do not want an Okinawa from one end of Japan to another. And that was part of his thinking on using the research at Manhattan. When Roosevelt died, Truman did not even know that Roosevelt was out of town. Don't even know he was out of town. They had spent in 83 days, they had spent one 15-minute meeting together, having a cup of tea. And if I can describe it for you, Roosevelt, loss of weight. His face was cadaverous, his face was gully. He was dying and he knew it. And that's why I want to spend more time at Warm Springs with Lucy. She's affectionate. She makes me laugh. Eleanor is so stern and cranky, you know? And Lucy is fun to be with. And we drove. I was able to drive with her. I had the gasoline on the wheel. I had the brakes on the wheel. And I'm done. And she knew it, and she was there with an artist, so she could have a portrait of Roosevelt, perhaps the last one, my guy. Even though I'm married, he's still my guy. And for Franklin Roosevelt, even though I'm married, she's always been the woman, you know? That my mother said I could marry, because she's a Catholic and I'm an Episcopalian. Back then it made a difference, didn't it? It made a huge difference. It doesn't as much today, but it certainly made a big difference back then. When Truman went to the White House, he was summoned from Sam Rayburn's office. He was a good friend of Speaker Rayburn. That urgent to the White House, he knew. And Eleanor's waiting for him. And he spotted her. Mrs. Roosevelt, I'm praying for you. Harry, I'm praying for you. You are the one in trouble now. You have no idea what my husband's plans were for the end of the war, the UN, his conversations he had at Yalta, with Churchill and Roosevelt about how Germany would be divided, what would happen in Eastern Europe. You have no, would there be open elections in Eastern Europe? You have no idea. But my husband kept it all here, and he did. And I've always maintained that Franklin Roosevelt's favorite word was ambiguous. You know, don't make decisions you don't have to make until you really need to make them. That's good advice, by the way. And also that his favorite color was gray. You know, they keep it oblique, you know, keep it in your head. You know, nobody needs to know the truth as long as you can remember the lies. See, that's the problem with lying. If you tell the truth, it doesn't change. The problem with lying is you got to remember the lies. That's the problem. And as MacArthur would say about Franklin Roosevelt, for Roosevelt, you know, why tell the truth when a lie will do just as well? MacArthur did not particularly care for Roosevelt, and Roosevelt did not particularly care for MacArthur, but he had juice. The war is as much military as it is political. So MacArthur's moving in, the Navy's moving in, island hopping, and Truman when Truman is over his head, he had failed at most everything he had to do, except beating down Bess to finally agree to marry him. I mean, she wore him out. They've been courting since the 4th grade. She wore him out. And when she finally said yes on this condition, this will be a deal killer. I know it'll be a deal killer. I will marry you if we live with my mother. To me, that's a deal killer. Negative. And Harry said yes. And she must have said, oh, now I'm stuck with this guy. Wallaces don't marry people that live in that part of town or on those side of the tracks. That happens all the time. And now we said yes to a demand I thought he would never agree to. We have to live with my mother. In the 1948 election, Mrs. Wallace's mother-in-law said, Harry, I don't think I can vote for you. Why am I not surprised? Poor Harry Truman. Bess always looked like she always had a puss on, didn't she? She always looked cranky. She was cranky. She always looked like her shoes were 2 sizes too small. He loved her. After he was devoted to her. Whatever. You do what you need. But I'm not going. Harry, I'm praying for you. And Roosevelt had a learning curve like a rocket shot. And of course, part of that learning curve was the Manhattan Project, which he had never heard of. It was top secret. Split the atom. It can release power, as much power for peace as the Leyte city for all time. Electricity too cheap to meter. And he also was handed, Harry Stimson, Secretary of War, handed him Einstein's letter, that had been written to Roosevelt before the Americans got involved. And Mr. President, read the last paragraph. And in it, Einstein said, even though I'm a pacifist, I think that if we can unleash a nuclear reaction, not only can we power a city with electricity too cheap to meter, I think we can unleash enough power to flatten a city, flatten it, and to take out an entire port. What kind of a bomb is this? He didn't know. What kind of a bomb is this? Well, when the Lord said, let there be light, there was light. That's the kind of bomb. That's what Oppenheimer's telling us. He thinks they're putting together on the blackboard. So Truman is president, and he's apologizing to the country. I'm over my head. He knew it. And another Washington insider got to Truman and said, stop apologizing. Boys, I feel like the stars, the planets, the moon have fallen on me, bales of hay. Stop apologizing for being president. Clark, call me Harry. You are no longer Harry. You will never be Harry again. Never. You are President of the United States. You are Commander-in-Chief. You will never be Harry again. It's like when you say I do, things change everything, right? Nothing is ever the same again once you utter those 2 words. You are no longer Harry. You are Commander-in-Chief. You are President of the United States, and there is a war to be won. Brace yourself. Square your shoulders. Lock your hips. Get that steely Clint Eastwood look in your eye. We need to win these wars. The American people depend on you. And from that comes that wonderful phrase, the buck stops here. Make a decision and stick with it. Dean Acheson, who later on became Truman's Secretary of State, said, you know what, Mr. President, call me Harry here, Mr. President. When I walked in, I needed 15 decisions from Roosevelt. He would say, let me think about it. With you, I get 15 decisions in 15 minutes. You bang, 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 bang. And we've got a new weapon, don't we? And Oppenheimer has just sent word to Truman, who's in Potsdam, Germany. And I'm talking to whom? 2 world-class figures. I failed in everything I've ever done. And there's Churchill, and there's Stalin. I'm Harry Truman, nobody from nowhere. And the word comes by cable. The word comes by telegram. The device has been successfully tested. 1,000,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the center of ground zero. We got 2 left. Built 3, 1 was tested and 2 left. And General Leslie Groves, who was in charge of the military piece, the war was over. Picked up 1 little boy, named after Truman. The other one, Fat Man, named after Churchill. And the first bomb had been delivered by the USS Indianapolis. And we know that story, torpedoed on the way back. And that's another story for another time. The second bomb was delivered by air. And Truman was asked, how about a test explosion to show the Japanese this is what we have? You see, Oppenheimer and the scientists, most of them, we can't use this on people. We can't use this on people. We need to give the Japanese a test explosion. Let them see it. And the only hint that Truman gave the Japanese military that we've got something big, he didn't even know how big, that in a memo he sent to the Japanese military, you can read it, it's called the Potsdam Declaration. He says, unless you surrender now, you will face prompt and utter destruction. Now they thought it was simply more round-the-clock bombing, Curtis LeMay and his B-29s, just sending into smoldering ash every Japanese city that they attacked, even Tokyo. And be careful when you attack Tokyo. If you kill the emperor, they'll never surrender. He's their god, you see. Chuck Sweeney, Tibbets, waiting with their B-29s, and the rumor was there are 2 bombs over here, in these bunkers that may end the war. It's a brand new weapon. What is it? Well, we don't know what it is, but I've never seen so many generals and admirals around in my life, and scientists. It may end the war. The only thing we know, and this is Tibbets and Sweeney, that when we drop it, don't hang around.
No.
Get out of the way, because it's never been used in a military fashion. That updraft might turn the plane right into the ground. It might blow every rivet out of it. It might rip the wings off it. When you drop it, don't watch it.
No.
It's like when you teach basketball to kids, when you make the shot, don't watch it. Follow the ball to the hoop. Don't just stand there and watch it. Get out of there. And boy, they're looking in the rearview mirror. What was that? We know Hiroshima was flattened, wasn't it? 47 square miles, flattened. The Hiroshima bomb, the element used was uranium, about the size of a football, to see what kind of power we can get out of uranium. The Nagasaki, plutonium, to see what kind of strength, what kind of power we can get from a ball of plutonium shaped the size of a football. The Nagasaki bomb proved to be more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, and in the long run. Is that him? Who's calling me? The Emperor is calling. The Emperor is calling. Because the Emperor gets on the radio and he tells the Japanese people, I'm relieving you of your oath to die for me. And we have to accept the unacceptable. See, what Truman knew is that I don't want an Okinawa from one end of Japan to another. These are going to be American casualties. For the most part, Truman told the Soviets stay out. And if this bomb can save American lives, it was always American lives. Only later on have Japanese historians mentioned the bomb saved Japanese lives as well. Truman did know this, that the Japanese military had taken up their slogan for resistance. And the slogan was, 100 million people die proudly. We will not surrender. We haven't lost a war in 2,500 years. And Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the war is over. The emperor. We must accept the unacceptable. MacArthur does not get his invasion. He had been planning for it. And that's why McVeigh, who had delivered the atomic bomb to the islands, was on his way to Leyte Gulf to become part of the invasion force for the Japanese home islands. And the Japanese military had put their finger right on the spot, Kyushu. MacArthur's landing right here. And we're gonna have a goal line stand right here. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers promptly redeployed from China to Japan. It's gonna be a goal line stand. We do not surrender. Truman's public opinion polls, 90, 91, 92%. The war is over. VE Day, VJ Day, and G.I. Joe and G.I. Jane are coming home, aren't they? You know, and my dad made it home. How do I know that?
Because you're here.
I'm here. There's a whole story behind that proposal and how that worked out. At family lore, when Leonard, my father, was proposed to by his engaged Shirley, marry me now. He said, no, the war is not over. I'm getting ready for the invasion of the Japanese home islands. But when I get home, and I will be home, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I will be home. That's why I'm here, I guess. So there's our story. You know, there's our story for this afternoon. VE Day, VJ Day, and Harry Truman inviting in Oppenheimer. When the Russians exploded their atomic bomb in 1949, we needed the equalizer. We needed more than the equalizer. And Truman invited in Oppenheimer to build the next generation of something to trump, if you will, the Russians getting the atomic bomb. And Oppenheimer said, I can't do it, Mr. President. I have blood on my hands. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, I have blood on my hands. Armageddon beckons. And Truman thanked him for his time. Oppenheimer left. And Dean Acheson came in, and he told Dean Acheson, never bring that man in here again. He only built it, I used it. And that was the end of Oppenheimer's role in nuclear planning and so forth. The guy who got to Oppenheimer and ruined him and turned him into a piece of shredded wheat, and all he did was drink martinis and have cigarettes, Edward Teller went to J. Edgar Hoover and said, Oppenheimer's a communist. He won't build the bomb. He's one of them.
That's why
J. Edgar Hoover went to Eisenhower. You gotta get rid of Oppenheimer. Get him out of the bomb project. He's a communist, he's one of them. And Teller said, I'll build it. I'll build it. That's another whole story. So before I leave, perhaps a question. I mean, we really got an awful lot done in a short period of time. You know, and as I said the first time we met, you know, we're going wide, huh? This is wide angle. You know, this is a mile wide and half an inch deep, but we're gonna get it done. Yes, please.
Did Roosevelt pick Truman to win the election or to carry on the presidency?
To carry on the presidency, and that's another hour story. And there were 4 reasons why he chose Truman. We don't have time for that.
Are they in McCullough's book?
Somebody have a thought? Yes.
I wanted to say, my husband worked with Teller. My husband was Hungarian, and so was Teller. And my husband hated Teller, called him a snake. And Teller always wanted something bigger, bigger, bigger.
I know.
And had these monster plans.
Teller's in hell.
Yeah,
I mean, if you
hope.
believe in that kind of retribution.
I hope. But not only that, Teller had a scheme to send out really horrible stuff to meet asteroids that were coming to.
Teller destroyed Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer's daughter hanged herself because I can't deal with the fact that my husband, who's a red, white, and blue patriot, has been destroyed by that man, you know, and have his security clearance snapped, you know. What was that? I think it was, security clearance was Q or C. That was the top secret clearance. My brother's a general, and I called him on an open line one time. And I asked him about the security clearance. He said, "What? Are you on an open line?" I said, "Hang up right now." And I asked him, "Do you have this clearance?" I forgot what it was. He said, "What? Hang up." It was like Q1 or C1 or something like that. It was like this burst over the phone. Hang up! I said, "What are you asking me?" Click. Something else I saw. Thank you for your company. I'll see you soon. I won't see you for a while, so thanks again.